This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Peter Sirr.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show. Today, Monday, November the 28th, is a very special day for poet Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin. It's her 80th birthday, and here at the breakfast table, Peter and I would like to wish her a very happy birthday indeed. Eiléan's been having quite an exciting month, it has to be said. She has just recently been elected C of Éisteanna, and a ceremony presided over by President Michael D. Higgins to confer the symbol of the office of C, the gold torque on Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin, took place in the Arts Council on Thursday the 17th of November this year. And also a one-day symposium on the work of Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin was organised by the School of English on Saturday the 19th of November. It was quite a symposium indeed. It featured discussion of her literary and intellectual influences, her poetry's fascinating relationship to and thinking upon readers and publics, and her long-standing interests in questions of language and translation. Both Peter and I were there and we really enjoyed it. We listened to speakers which included Michael Cronin, Gerard Griffin, Maria Johnston, Conor Linney, Sinead McKay, Cormac O'Quillan, that's Eiléan's brother, and Peter Sirr, who's sitting here beside me. And I also took part on an exciting panel, I have to say, with Moya Cannon, Gerald Daw, Vincent Woods, where we talked about our favourite poems of Eiléan's and their importance to us as poets. But I really have to say that the highlight of the day was the grand finale when Eiléan read new poems from her own work.
So here on Books for Breakfast, we thought we'd come up with our own birthday tribute. 2 years ago, when Eiléan's collected poems was published by Gallery Press, we were invited to interview Eiléan in Molly, Museum of Literature, Ireland, to celebrate the publication.
I remember that very well, actually, Peter, don't you as well? It was very strange, actually, because it was our first person-to-person interview, because we were right in the middle of lockdown, and I remember walking with you to the interviews through very silent, eerie streets in Dublin. We heard the odd ambulance going by, the odd car, but it was very eerie and silent. Of course, then we got into Molly to talk to Eiléan, and it was hugely exciting.
It was indeed. But at the same time, it was that kind of eerie thing, you're in an empty room and, you know, you're kind of pretending there's an audience there for it. And the video recording was broadcast later by Molly. But we thought for the purposes of this special podcast that we'd edit our own parts just to make for a better audio listening experience, as we were recording in kind of very challenging and echoey space. But you will hear Eiléan responding live as she did on the day. And we're sure this will give you a good sense of what it was like to be with her on that November day 2 years ago.
But to go back to that, really, it was quite a brilliant night, really, on November the 13th in Molly in 2020, when Peter and I interviewed Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin to celebrate the publication by the Gallery Press of her collected poems. It's a book of singular beauty and mysteries. It opens doors into multiple worlds, mythical figures, travellers, pilgrims, women, especially nuns, and many more. And I think that this impressive collected poems, it'll also serve to excite and inform readers further, because it contains not only poetry from more than 50 years and 9 collections, but also new, previously unpublished poems. But just to remind the listeners a little bit about Eiléan, Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin was born in Cork into an intellectual, academic and Republican family. Her father, Cormac O'Quillan, was Professor of Irish at University College Cork, and her mother was the writer Eilish Dillon, a niece of Joseph Mary Plunkett, one of the signatories of the 1916 proclamation. She was raised in a bilingual family, and she was educated at UCC and continued on to Oxford on a scholarship, where she obtained a B.Lit in Renaissance English.
Her first collection, Acts and Monuments, published by Gallery Press in 1972, won the Patrick Kavanagh Award. To date, the Gallery Press has published her 9 collections of poems, including The Sunfish in 2009, which won the Griffin International Poetry Prize, and The Mother House 2019, which was winner of the Irish Times Poetry Now Award. Eiléan was lecturer and subsequently professor in medieval and Renaissance literature at Trinity College Dublin, and currently is a fellow and professor of English emeritus and a member of Éisteanna. She served as Ireland Professor of Poetry from 2016 and 2019 and was married to the poet Macdara Woods, who died in 2018. Awarding Ní Chuilleanáin the 2010 Griffin Prize, the judges noted she's a truly imaginative poet whose imagination is authoritative and transformative. Her poetry poses many questions, not always directly, and often chooses to leave the questions themselves unresolved, allowing them to resonate meaningfully past the actual poem's end. And I started off by asking Eiléan what it meant to her to have her work collected in a single edition like this. Was it daunting or exciting, or a bit of both?
It's a bit daunting because when you regard a collected poems, you then have to ask yourself, what do I do now? But I have written one poem since it arrived, so it isn't quite the end. It's daunting because I had no idea that there was so much, and I found it very hard to decide what to be about. It's also very exciting, of course. How could it not be?
Was there much leaving out, I wondered?
No, that's not enough. It was really quite indulgent, I think. But I thought, when you look at something you've written as long ago as some of these poems were written, you think almost that they were written by another person, and you let them sink or swim, I suppose.
Well, one of the great pleasures of interviewing Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin that night in Molly in November 2020 was hearing her actually read her poetry. A real treat, actually. So Eiléan began by reading a poem of hers called Swineherd from Acts and Monuments 1972, published by Gallery.
This used to be the only poem of mine that people ask me to read, but it's gone a little bit into the background recently, so it's nice to bring it out again. Swineherd. When all this is over, said the swineherd, I mean to retire where nobody will have heard about my special skills and conversation is mainly about the weather. I intend to learn how to make coffee, at least as well as the Portuguese lay sister in the kitchen, and polish the brass fenders every day. I want to lie awake at night, listening to cream crawling to the top of the jug and the water lying soft in the cistern. I want to see an orchard where the trees grow in straight lines and the yellow fox finds shelter between the navy blue trunks, where it gets dark early in summer and the apple blossom is allowed to wither on the bough.
And that was Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin. She was reading her poem Swineherd from Acts and Monuments 1972. There's a great sense of unsolved riddles in that poem, I think. I often wonder, who is the lay Portuguese sister? What breed of fox is actually yellow? Does it usually get dark early in summer? Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin has said, as a poet, I am drawn to things that really are mysterious. It's not that I make them mysterious. For instance, I've always been drawn as a reader to a poem of hers like Street, which always seems so mysterious to me too. He fell in love with the butcher's daughter when he saw her passing by in her white trousers, dangling a knife on a ring at her belt. He stared at the dark, shining drops on the paving stones. So next, I asked Eiléan, could she talk a little bit about the mysterious in her work?
I suppose, yes. I find that when I manage to write a poem that I'm reasonably happy with, it's often about something that I just don't understand. I don't understand really my own fascination with convents because I spent my youth thinking that's definitely not for me. I don't understand quite the things that I feel when I'm looking, say, out of a train at an industrial landscape. I feel there's something intrusive, something that's trying to control me, and I don't know why I feel that. So I suppose that the sense of wanting to be somewhere else, wanting to see something different, I felt that quite strongly at one stage. I also wrote this during my first year of teaching, and I think I wanted to escape from the kind of pressure, because you never work as hard as you do in your first few years as a teacher.
That's true.
Sure you agree.
Yeah,
yes?
I do agree with that.
Yes.
Among the many things that Eiléan has said about language is a really serious use of language is a public good. Not using language in foolish and inappropriate and inaccurate ways is something that everyone should learn. we need to know the things that language can do, and studying literature is one of the ways to find that out. I wondered if literature was always at the centre of her life, and did she always know that she would become a poet?
I think I didn't always know that I'd become a poet, but I did always know that I'd become a writer. I suppose it was just an expectation. There was a lot of it about. My father was a bit of an outsider in the Celtic studies world of his time. Everybody was into philology, and I don't know that, although he was fascinated by words, I don't know that he felt really comfortable with that, and he managed to be the person that lectured on poetry and collected folk tales. And so, I mean, it didn't just come from one side of my family. It seemed to be an absolute given.
One of the striking things about Eiléan's poetry is its preoccupation with language. And of course, growing up in a bilingual house must have informed her ideas about language. She said, "I was brought up to a certain extent bilingual, and that gives one a sense of always being unsure about which is the right language to express oneself in." Clearly she writes mainly in English, but she's always written a little in Irish, and she's translated Antonella Anedda, the Italian poet, into Irish. Indeed, there are poems in Irish in the collected. So I wondered, was she ever tempted to be a bilingual poet, and what does Irish mean to her?
Oh, I've often thought about this. I think my earliest years, I was definitely very, very much a bilingual child. I was the eldest child, and then other children came along. I went to school. Cork at the time seemed to be quite hostile to Irish. I had even from my earliest years, I was having to stand up for my name. Then I realised at a certain point that because I had never lived in an Irish-speaking community, I didn't feel that I had the tools. And very occasionally, I mean, the two poems published in this are not the only poems I've written in Irish. And I do often find it quite easy to translate into Irish. It seems to, because it's the alternative language, and translation is about alternatives. But to be a sort of a citizen of an Irish-speaking community is something I've never managed.
Sure.
Even though, I have not infrequently ended up late at night with drink taken, conversing fluently in Irish with people in strange places. But that isn't, it's not something that happens naturally. And therefore, I suppose, if you're going to write poetry, you need all the tools and resources that you can find.
Eiléan, as everyone knows, was married to the poet MacDara Woods. And actually at the end of the collected poems, there are some wonderful poems about MacDara, such as Key Rings and the Mirandy Bridge, poems that I really admire and go back and read over and over again. And of course, they founded Ciphers together, the literary magazine, still going strong after over 40 years. So I asked Eiléan, how was it living together as two poets and writing together and travelling together? I know Italy was such an enormous part of their lives together. Do they read each other's work? How do they support each other?
Yes, obviously we disagreed. That was how we knew that we were actually saying what we thought.
Yeah.
We would not necessarily talk about a poem until it was nearly ready.
Yeah.
And then at that stage, we would show each other. Not always, I've sometimes found a poem in a book that I hadn't seen before it appeared. But, and you feel that, here's somebody that you trust, that has the judgment, and who writes quite differently from you. And I think that actually is quite helpful too.
Eiléan is part of a generation that included not just MacDara, but also Michael Hartnett, older writers who became friends and mentors such as Piers Hutchinson and Leland Bardwell. How important was the presence of these poets and their work to her? I suppose I'm thinking in particular of Piers Hutchinson. He spoke many languages and was a great translator, she said. His presence must have been important to her. how well read he was in European literature, of course, and Elaine's inaugural lecture as Professor of Poetry was on Piers Hutchinson, a poet and his languages. I wondered if she could say something about his influence on her, and of course also the influence of the others.
Yes, when I met Pearse and Leland, I was so young that they looked old. I mean, they were in their 40s. And so that was I did think of them as belonging to an earlier generation. They were very influential in different ways. I suppose the thing about Leland was just, I've been reading work of hers recently, just her sincerity, the sense that that you got from her poetry, that she was saying what she really meant. And when we were all editing together, she was inclined to say, I think this is made up. Now I make things up, and so for a while I didn't understand that. Yeah. But she was very much, I think, again, it's a seriousness about what you do with poetry, but that it was something that you took seriously. And Pearse was, of course, very influential simply because of the breadth of his knowledge, the number of languages he spoke, his openness to things, which I think I was very inclined to look down my nose at all kinds of things when I was young. And so it was very important to me to come across somebody like Pearse who would, for example, read British war poetry with enthusiasm, something that I have always found difficult to do.
So moving on, I asked Elaine, would she read another poem for us? And I was delighted that she read Pygmalion's Image from the Magdalen Sermon, 1989.
Well, it's stolen from Ovid, of course, but I did put in my own ideas as well.
And I had to agree, because stealing is always a great idea for poets.
Oh, yes.
Much needed.
Yeah. Pygmalion's Image. Not only her stone face laid back, staring in the ferns, but everything the scoop of the valley contains begins to move, and beyond the horizon the trucks beat the highway. A tree inflates gently on the curve of the hill, an insect crashes on the carved eyelid, grass blows westward from the roots as the wind knifes under her skin and ruffles it like a book. The crisp hair is real, wriggling like snakes, a rustle of veins, tick of blood in the throat, the lines of the face tangle and catch, and a green leaf of language comes twisting out of her mouth.
There's a tremendous sense of the dramatic in that poem, isn't there? Poor Pygmalion, the sculptor in Ovid, who falls in love with his marble woman statue, and then the gods bring her alive in a Medusa-like way. Elaine's poems are often highly dramatic, and they often have an unsettling quality. I'm thinking of lines like "Something to lose, it came in the equipment, alongside the suicide pill and the dark blue card." That was from the poem Going Back to Oxford. Or "It was his bag of tricks she wanted, surely not him." That was from The Pig Boy. It's as if Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin is a kind of storyteller, though it's not always clear who's speaking or to whom. Not that she's withholding information, but that her speakers are very fluid. So I asked Elaine, would she say that her imagination is in fact very dramatic?
Well, I think something needs to happen in a poem. If something hasn't happened between the first and half line, then the poem isn't there. Narrative, I suppose, and especially folk tales, are dramatic. And The Pig Boy is really from the Hans Andersen story about the prince who disguises himself as the pig boy in order to court the princess. But she's only interested in his magic tricks.
Yeah, brilliant.
Death and the questions of pain and suffering and loss play a part in Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin's work as well. But often she uses the mythic moment to process her own personal experience. I'm thinking of the next poem that she read for us, where she uses the Assumption of Mary as a means to discuss her own mother's passing. But there's a sort of guarded secrecy to it too, which is intriguing. I asked her would she talk us into this poem, The Fireman's Lift, from The Brazen Serpent.
The thing about Parma Cathedral is it's a beautiful Romanesque cathedral, and my parents loved it and I loved it. And then we got up to as far as the cupola, which has this Correggio painting, and they couldn't stand it. That this should be dumped on the top of a dark Romanesque church. And I thought it was just splendid, because my taste in painting is so much for those big, overpopulated paintings like Rubens' Last Judgment, which is in Munich. I used to go and look at it on my way to Rome. And I think that the other thing about this is when I was young, I tried to write a poem about Rubens' Last Judgment, and it was not a success. And when my mother was dying, she said to me about the nursing home, she said, good thing about this place is all the beautiful girls. Nice. And they were beautiful. Yeah. And I suddenly thought, I could write about that picture now, about the angels, because, you know, the nurses were having to lift her and move her and so on. And I know enough now to be able to write this poem. Well, I'll read Fireman's Lift,
great.
which of course is a way of lifting an inert body.
Okay, great.
In Italian, it's called La Sede del Papa. I was standing beside you, looking up through the big tree of the cupola, where the church splits wide open to admit celestial choirs, the fallout of brightness. The Virgin was spiraling to heaven, hauled up in stages. Past mist and shining, teams of angelic arms were heaving, supporting, crowding her, and we stepped back as the painter longed to, while his arms swept in the large strokes. We saw the work entire and how the light melted and faded bodies so that loose feet and elbows and staring eyes floated in the wide stone petticoat, clear and free as weeds. This is what love sees, that angle, the crick in the branch loaded with fruit, a jaw defining itself, a shoulder yoked, the back making itself a roof, the legs a bridge, the hands a crane and a cradle, their heads bowed over to reflect on her fair face and hair, so like their own, as she passed through their hands. We saw them lifting her, the pillars of their arms, her face a capital leaning into an arch, as the muscles clung and shifted for a final purchase together under her weight as she came to the edge of the cloud.
There's no question that religion features in Eiléan's poetry a lot. I mean, there are lots of references to nuns and anchoresses and cloisters. One of those nun poems that I've always liked is J'ai mal à nos dents, where the nun, she was an aunt, I think. She gets her French wrong when she goes to the dentist, speaking in the plural instead of the singular. She was quite a character, I think, and I wondered, again, why do nuns surface so often in her poetry?
It is partly, of course, just the fact that I had these three aunts who were nuns and three lay aunts, unmarried, who all lived together and did so much praying that the nuns didn't want to stay with them. They wanted to come and stay with us where they would have a bit of privacy.
Yes.
So I was fascinated, I suppose, with that paradox of lay piety of that time. They were very old-fashioned, of course, even for the 40s and 50s. But lay piety, which seemed to be so much more intense in some ways.
Yeah.
I mean, the nuns were out in the world, really. They were working, they were doing things, and sometimes, they were having to manage and quarrel. I remember listening to my Aunt Anna, in fact, quarreling with her chaplain in French because he wanted her to give jobs. There were people already in the jobs. He wanted her to find jobs for the pieds noirs who were coming back from Algeria. And I remember her saying, men alike, that she wouldn't fire a lay person to put the pieds noirs in.
Yeah.
So, yes, they had something, and that fascinated me.
Even beyond those family connections, Christianity is a great fount of metaphor and stories. And they just talked about the folkloric connection too, legends and stories, Mary Magdalene preaching in Marseille. And I wondered, To what extent was she interested in the feminine presence in Christianity, and why is Mary Magdalene so important? And I suppose I was also thinking about the importance of the lives of women in general to the poetry.
I suppose one always asks, where are the women? What are they doing? I was particularly drawn to Mary Magdalene because of the hair fetish, since I have one myself. I also liked, I spent years teaching medieval but mostly Renaissance literature. And a lot of that, of course, is the Reformation, which is about language, editing, translation. How do you translate things? How do you translate from a translation? I've been drawn into the study of religion, quite apart from my personal religion, which is there. It is something that I don't think I'll run out of ideas as long as I'm thinking about that.
Nuns feature a lot in her writing, as we've already said. I love the poem The Real Thing in the Brazen Serpent, where she writes about Sister Custos, a 16th century nun. But I also know that Eiléan does have another obsession, and that's trains. And in this next poem, she manages to get both of these obsessions, nuns and trains, into it. So I asked Eiléan, would she like to read her poem, The Sister, from The Sunfish, which was published in 2009.
The Sister. This poem is actually in two sections. How on earth did she manage that journey on her own? When she was a young woman, they had plenty to keep them busy. They were small, they felt queasy, they gripped a pillar in the shade and held on. And as for leaving home, still the trains have never changed. They thunder up the valleys, built for strapping fellows, flinging their big bundles easily onto high shelves, real men. She turned up at the station, small, her clothes once elegant, all black. Past the train window slid the suburbs, a fast river. She saw a white-haired man, waist deep, ducking under and rising again, a cormorant. A lump of a lad handed her bag down to her. Lopsided, she walked as far as the convent door. They greeted her with a leathery kiss. They told her where to find her bed and the hour of dinner. They knew the silent meal would be no surprise, no more than the hard bread, tougher at every slice, nor the dead silence of night until the first train troubled the valley. She would know lying there, others were sitting up, working in pairs to finish the stitching, tacking the last of the lace. But the cold woke her, and a subtle mist as fine as galls hung on the glass. In the freezing dawn, she dragged a web just as light across her skin, veiling herself for good, and she slept on.
Well, it was wonderful to hear Eiléan read that poem, The Sister. And in fact, talking about reading, I thought I'd ask her a little bit about that too. When she was Ireland Professor of Poetry, she gave a lecture titled, Who are the Readers of Poetry? And she said that reading is a talent. And I wondered how important was reading to Eiléan Ní Chuilleanáin's development as a poet.
When somebody says, I don't read poetry, I just write it, you know what the poetry is going to be like. It's absolutely something. It tells you what you don't want to do apart from anything else. It tells you what you might sometimes just stand back and say, gosh, isn't it wonderful to be able to do that? I remember reading Shakespeare sonnets when I was young and thinking, how could anybody do that? But I never tried to do the same thing, obviously. So it's something that there's a back and forth in reading, I think. It's a conversation with the person you're reading.
Yeah, that's true.
Eiléan managed to get through almost 50 years in academia without teaching creative writing, and I wondered, why was this? Did she feel it's not something that she'd have liked to have done? Maybe that writing can't really be taught.
I have tried very occasionally, and usually in faraway places. But I remember McBarry used to teach in a university in Boston. I went along one year, and I remember trying to give some very tentative advice to somebody, and she said, well, I just feel as if I'd been pistol whipped with a brick. So I thought, this is not the job I think it's quite different from the other kind of teaching, which I sometimes think I can do, find out what they don't know and tell them if you know it yourself. And I don't think that's how people actually learn to be writers.
Well, I think we're drawing to an end now, and Ed and myself, I suppose, we're just wondering what happens after I collect it. Do you sit back and say, that's it now, I can turn to something else? Given the quality of the new work in the collected, I kind of suspected that wasn't going to be the case.
In one way, I think one should always write with the idea, I don't have to do this, I could stop. But on the other hand, as long as I find interesting things to write about, I want to go on doing it, because I feel that there are lots of mysteries that I haven't solved, and that I probably never will solve, but there may be other ways into them that I haven't yet discovered. The poem that I've just finished writing is about Achilles in the Iliad, and the old man Phoenix remembering him as a little boy sitting on his knee at a feast. And I thought, what an extraordinary thing. I looked this up when my son and his wife told us that they were going to call their first child Phoenix. I thought, there was somebody called Phoenix in the Iliad. I must find out. I must go back and find out about him again. So that was a revelation, in fact, to discover that element in a war epic of people thinking about a child.
Do you think there's kind of continual nourishment in the classics like that?
Oh God, yes. In a way, there's nourishment everywhere, because you pick up a terrible book in a bookshop and you think, God, I'm glad I'm not going to have to read that. But at the same time, it niggles you, and you think, what should they have done? What should they have said? And why am I so interested? And you find it again.
To finish, we thought we'd get Eiléan to read one last poem. She's written a beautiful poem for one of her grandsons, Phoenix. And so we gave the last word to Eiléan, who read her poem in Kippet Hodie from The Boys of Blue Hill, 2005.
Yes, for Phoenix Alexander Woods, who was born on the 18th of April 2013. When you fell into our language like a fish into water, no wonder you were blinded by the splash you made. We wiped our eyes, but for you it took longer. It sprayed like feathers around you while you tried making out the noises, and slowly the stream ran calmer, though it took you a while to trust your ears and eyes. How are you supposed to grasp the water's flow? But look, those flourishes are pebbles and fish. Fish are slipping away. The water is clear and still. When you reach for words, they will be hard like pebbles in your hand.
I think we've reached the end of our Books for Breakfast podcast this morning. I'm definitely rushing off to have more coffee. And I'm Enda Wiley, and I have Peter Sirr here with me. And Peter, would you like to tell everyone about the details of the podcast if they'd like to listen again?
Well, you can subscribe at all the usual sources, Google and Apple and so on. And if you want to check out the notes that go along with this podcast, you can go to booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. And yeah, so
we'll be back again. We'll have the toast on, we'll have the kettle boiling, we will have more books to discuss, and we're looking forward to having you here. So goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.